There's a silence out here in the sun-scorched lands of the Arizona Territory that gets under your skin. It ain't the quiet of peace, not usually. It's the quiet of waiting. Waiting for the rain that never seems to fall. Waiting for the venomous strike from the dust. Waiting for the echo of a gunshot to fade. Or waiting for the hammer of judgment to fall. Swift and sometimes brutally wrong. Tonight, friends, we're journeying into that silence, into a story born of grief, greed, and the kind of injustice that can banish a soul, not just from a town, but from the very warmth of human kindness. It's a story about a woman left with nothing but her child and the dust of betrayal, and the unlikely, dangerous refuge she found in the shadow of a man the world had already condemned. The dust swirled thick around Abigail Hayes's worn skirts, clinging like the stairs of the townsfolk lining the single street of Redemption Ridge. Their faces were hard, shuttered, reflecting the judgment passed down from the self-appointed pinnacle of their small society. Abigail clutched the small hand of her 6-year-old son, Samuel, his face pale and bewildered, his eyes wide with a fear he didn't fully understand, but felt keenly from the tension radiating from his mother and the hostile silence surrounding them. Behind them, the door to the small, neat house she had shared with her husband, Daniel, was closed, barred to her now. Before them lay the vast, unforgiving expanse of the desert, shimmering under a merciless sun. Banished. The word itself felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Sheriff Clayton, a man whose badge seemed too heavy for his slumped shoulders, stood awkwardly beside them, avoiding Abigail's gaze. He held the reins of a single, tired-looking pack mule loaded with a pathetic bundle of their essential belongings: a blanket roll, a small sack of flour, a canteen of water, Samuel's worn teddy bear tucked precariously on top. It was all they were allowed, all that remained of the life Abigail and Daniel had painstakingly built here. "I'm sorry, Abigail," the sheriff muttered, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. Judge Pembroke, the town council, they voted. After Daniel's accident and the rumors, he trailed off, unable to meet her eyes, shame warring with helplessness on his face. Rumors? Lies, Sheriff Clayton. Abigail's voice, though trembling, held a core of steel. Lies spread by men who wanted our land, who saw opportunity in my husband's grave. She looked towards the imposing brick building at the end of the street, the bank, owned and presided over by Judge Harrison Pembroke, the man who held Redemption Ridge in his manicured fist. Pembroke stood on the steps now, watching, his face a mask of solemn civic duty, but his eyes held a cold, reptilian satisfaction. "The council decided," the sheriff repeated weakly, gesturing towards the desert. "You have until sundown to be beyond the township limits. They don't want any trouble. Trouble." As if she, a grieving widow with a small child, was the source of trouble, and not the whispers and land-grab schemes orchestrated by Pembroke after Daniel's convenient death in a supposed mine shaft collapse just weeks earlier. Daniel had been finding good color in their claim, promising color, maybe even the vein Pembroke had long coveted. And Daniel had been asking questions, uncomfortable questions, about some of the judge's less savory land dealings. Then the accident. Swift, final, and officially ruled tragic but unavoidable. Now, Abigail, refusing Pembroke's insultingly low offer to buy her out, found herself accused, through insidious rumor and Pembroke's careful manipulation of the town's fear and superstition, of bringing bad luck, of somehow being responsible, her grief deemed insufficient, her independence suddenly suspect. Banished, with nowhere to go, nothing to her name but a mule, a child, and a burning sense of injustice. She looked at the faces lining the street, faces she had known, neighbors she had shared bread with, women she had prayed alongside in the small church. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stared back, hard-eyed, convinced by Pembroke's narrative, eager to expel the source of perceived misfortune. There was no help here, no mercy. Abigail straightened her shoulders, pulling Samuel closer. "Come, Samuel," she whispered, her voice thick but steady. "We'll go." She took the mule's lead rope from the sheriff's unresisting hand, gave one last, lingering look at the closed door of her home, then turned her face towards the harsh, indifferent landscape stretching before them. She didn't look back. Behind her, Judge Pembroke allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning back into the cool sanctuary of his bank. The dust settled slowly in the street, marking the quiet, brutal efficiency of frontier justice when wielded by the powerful. Redemption Ridge. The name mocked her with every step she took away from it, the settlement shrinking behind her until it was just a scar on the vast canvas of the desert. Built on hope, like so many frontier towns, it clung to the banks of a muddy, unreliable creek at the foot of the rugged, sun-baked Dragoon Mountains. Silver whispers had drawn the first settlers, but the real wealth, Abigail knew, lay in controlling the scarce water and the grazing land, something Judge Harrison Pembroke understood better than anyone. He'd arrived years ago, not as a prospector, but as a man with capital and ambition, quickly establishing the bank, then maneuvering himself into the position of judge, mayor, and chief arbiter of the town's fortunes. He cultivated an image of stern respectability, contributing to the church, quoting scripture, presiding over town meetings with solemn gravity. But beneath the veneer lay a core of ruthless avarice. Daniel had seen it, had started digging into Pembroke's acquisition of neighboring ranches, his control over water rights. And now, Daniel was dead, and Abigail was in exile. She had loved Daniel fiercely, a good man, strong, kind, with a laugh that could make the harsh land seem less daunting. They had poured their sweat and dreams into their small ranch, the Bar H, nestled in a box canyon with a reliable spring, the real prize Pembroke coveted. Samuel had been born there, his first steps taken on the porch, overlooking the valley Daniel had worked so hard to irrigate. Now, it was all gone. The memories felt like shards of glass in her heart. Her immediate concern, however, wasn't grief or anger, but survival. She and Samuel. The desert stretched before them, vast, silent, hostile. Mesquite, cola cactus, sharp-edged rocks, and shimmering heat haze. They had minimal water, a handful of food. The mule plodded wearily, unused to the rough terrain. Samuel, trooper that he was, walked beside her, his small hand clutching hers tightly, his face smudged with dust, his eyes wide with confusion and the beginnings of fear. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, his voice small. Away from here, Samuel, Abigail answered, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. To find a new place. A safe place. She had no idea where that might be. The nearest settlement was days away, across harsh, waterless country. Could they even make it? As the sun climbed higher, the heat became brutal. The silence pressed in, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps, the buzz of unseen insects, and the mournful cry of a distant hawk circling overhead. Abigail scanned the landscape constantly, searching for shade, for water, for any sign of shelter. She rationed the water carefully, giving most of it to Samuel, her own throat parched and raw. By late afternoon, the mule was stumbling, exhausted, and Samuel was beginning to flag, his small legs struggling to keep up. Abigail's own strength was failing. Despair, a heavy weight, added to the physical burden. They found meager shade under a rocky overhang as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Abigail shared the last of their hardtack biscuits with Samuel, forcing herself to chew the dry crumbs. The water in the canteen was dangerously low. Fear, cold and sharp, began to replace the burning injustice in her heart. Pembroke hadn't just banished them. He had condemned them, sent them out into the wilderness to die quietly, conveniently. As darkness fell, bringing a surprising chill to the desert air, Abigail huddled with Samuel under their single thin blanket, the pack mule tethered nearby, its head drooping. The silence now felt menacing, filled with imagined sounds, the slither of a snake, the cough of a mountain lion, the stealthy approach of someone. Pembroke's men? Would he send someone to ensure they didn't somehow survive, didn't return to cause trouble? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She must have dozed off, exhaustion overcoming fear. She awoke with a start to the sound of the mule snorting nervously, its ears pricked. Samuel stirred beside her, whimpering softly. Abigail sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. She peered into the moonlit darkness. At the edge of their small camp, blending almost perfectly with the shadows cast by the jagged rocks, stood a figure, a man. Tall, lean, dressed in dark, dusty clothing, a low-brimmed hat obscuring his face. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, watching them. Still, silent. Abigail froze, clutching Samuel tightly. Was this one of Pembroke's men? An outlaw? A hostile Indian? She reached instinctively for the only weapon she possessed, Daniel's old skinning knife, tucked into the mule's pack. It wasn't much against a rifle. The man didn't move, didn't speak. The moonlight glinted faintly on something metallic near his hip, a holstered revolver. He seemed less immediately threatening than simply watchful, assessing. After a long, tense moment that stretched Abigail's nerves to the breaking point, he made a slight, almost imperceptible gesture with his head towards the east, towards the faint trail they had followed away from Redemption Ridge. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the shadows and was gone. Abigail remained frozen, listening intently. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the rocks. Who was he? What did his gesture mean? Was it a warning or something else? The encounter left her deeply unsettled, adding another layer of mystery and potential danger to their already precarious situation. She didn't sleep again that night, straining her ears for any sound, clutching the knife, her protective instincts overriding her exhaustion. Whoever the dark figure was, his silent appearance served as a stark reminder. They were not truly alone out here, and not all watchers were indifferent. The desert held its own secrets, its own dangerous inhabitants, far from the judgments of Redemption Ridge. Dawn broke cold and gray, revealing a landscape that offered no comfort. Their water was almost gone. Samuel was listless, his face flushed, his breathing shallow. Abigail knew, with chilling certainty, that they couldn't survive another day like the last. They needed water, shelter, help. But where? The stranger's gesture towards the east. Did it mean danger lay that way, back towards Redemption Ridge? Or was he pointing them away from some other threat? She had no way of knowing. Her instinct, however, was to move further away from Pembroke's reach, deeper into the rugged Dragoon Mountains that loomed to the west. It was wilder country, perhaps more dangerous, but maybe, just maybe, it offered a chance of finding water, of finding refuge beyond the reach of Redemption Ridge's malice. She coaxed Samuel onto the weary mule, securing him as best she could, then took the lead rope again, turning her back on the rising sun and heading towards the shadowed canyons cutting into the mountains. The going was harder now, steeper, rockier. The mule stumbled frequently. Abigail scanned the slopes constantly, searching for any sign of water. A patch of greener vegetation, a dark stain on the rocks. Hours passed. The sun climbed, beating down relentlessly. Samuel grew weaker, barely conscious. His small body slumped against the mule's bony back. Abigail's hope dwindled with every dry wash, every barren slope. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her completely, she saw it. Not water, but smoke. A thin, almost invisible plume curling up from behind a jumble of rocks, partway up a narrow side canyon. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant someone. Friend or foe, it represented their only chance. Gathering her last reserves of strength, praying it wasn't Pembroke's men lying in wait, Abigail urged the mule forward, scrambling up the steep, rocky trail towards the smoke. As she rounded a massive boulder, she found the source. A small, hidden camp, nestled in a sheltered alcove beneath an overhang. A low fire smoldered, a coffee pot sitting near the embers, a couple of pack animals, better quality than her own weary mule, were tethered nearby, grazing on sparse clumps of winter grass. And sitting by the fire, cleaning a rifle with slow, deliberate movements, was the man from the night before, the Dark Cowboy. He looked up as she stumbled into the clearing, his eyes narrowing slightly under the brim of his hat. He wasn't surprised to see her. Perhaps he had been watching her slow, desperate ascent. He didn't rise, didn't speak, just watched her with that same unnerving stillness. "Please," Abigail gasped, her voice cracking, gesturing towards Samuel slumped on the mule. "My son, he's sick. We need water. Help us." The man's gaze flickered towards Samuel, lingering for a moment on the boy's pale face, then returned to Abigail. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, a mixture of weariness, wariness, perhaps a hint of something else she couldn't decipher. Finally, He gave a curt nod towards a canteen hanging from his saddle. "Water," he said, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. He made no move to help her, just returned his attention to cleaning his rifle. Relief washed over Abigail, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She rushed to the canteen, unscrewed the cap with trembling fingers, and carefully gave Samuel small sips. The boy coughed weakly, but swallowed, his eyelids fluttering slightly. Abigail took a long drink herself, the cool water easing the fire in her throat. She looked back at the stranger, gratitude warring with apprehension. He hadn't turned them away, but his welcome, if it could be called that, was colder than the mountain wind. She eased Samuel down from the mule, wrapping him tightly in their blanket, settling him near the fire's meager warmth. The stranger continued his work, ignoring them. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Abigail felt like an intruder, unwelcome but tolerated out of some grudging sense of necessity she didn't understand. "My name is Abigail Hayes," she offered finally, needing to break the silence. "This is my son, Samuel." The man didn't look up. After a moment, he grunted, "Crow. Silas Crow. Silas Crow." The name fit him. Dark, solitary, watchful. He offered nothing more. No explanation for his presence here. No questions about their plight. He seemed a man content, perhaps determined, to remain shrouded in mystery. As the day wore on, a strange, unspoken routine established itself. Crow tended his camp, checked his traps hidden further up the canyon, occasionally disappearing for hours into the surrounding wilderness, moving with a silent competence that spoke of long familiarity with this harsh landscape. Abigail focused on Samuel, coaxing broth Crow provided from his own supplies into the boy, tending to him with worried tenderness. Samuel remained weak, feverish, his cough persistent. Abigail recognized the signs of lung fever, a dangerous affliction, especially for a child weakened by hardship. She knew he needed more than just rest and broth. He needed medicine, proper care she couldn't provide. She watched Silas Crow, wondering, did he possess any medical knowledge? Did he have remedies hidden away? But his reserve, his almost tangible aura of "leave me alone," made her hesitate to ask. He seemed a man who guarded his solitude fiercely. Yet he had offered water, shared his fire, provided broth. There was a contradiction there, a hint of something beneath the hard exterior. Later that afternoon, Crow returned from checking his traps, carrying not pelts, but a bundle of specific roots and herbs. He wordlessly began crushing them near the fire, mixing them with hot water into a pungent, steaming poultice. He glanced toward Samuel, then indicated the poultice with a nod. "For the chest," he said gruffly. "Helps the breathing. Learned from people who knew." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. She carefully applied the warm poultice to Samuel's small chest, the aromatic steam seeming to ease his labored breathing almost immediately. Crow watched for a moment, his expression unreadable, before turning back to his own tasks. Who was this man? A drifter? An outlaw hiding out? A hermit who had simply turned his back on the world? And why, after his initial indifference, was he now offering this quiet, practical help? That night, a new threat arrived, not human, but animal. The chilling howl of wolves echoed down the canyon, closer than Abigail liked. Fear prickled her skin. Crow seemed unperturbed. He calmly built up the fire, checked his rifle and revolver, then sat near the edge of the firelight, watching the darkness, perfectly still, perfectly alert. Abigail huddled closer to Samuel, clutching the skinning knife, feeling utterly inadequate. She saw Crow glance towards her, perhaps noting her fear. "They smell the camp," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Hungry. Stay by the fire?" "Mostly, they fear fire." His calmness was strangely reassuring. He exuded a quiet competence, a sense of knowing exactly how to handle the dangers of this wild place. The wolves circled, their eyes occasionally glinting just beyond the firelight, their howls weaving a tapestry of primal fear. But they didn't attack the camp directly. Crow remained awake all night, a silent guardian, his presence a shield against the darkness. In the morning, the wolves were gone. Samuel's breathing seemed a little easier, his fever slightly lower thanks to the poultice. Abigail felt a profound wave of gratitude towards the silent, enigmatic man who had given them shelter, but her relief was short-lived. As Crow returned from scouting the canyon mouth, his face was grim. "Riders coming," he stated flatly. "3 of them. Following your mule tracks. Not prospectors." Abigail's blood ran cold. Pembroke's men. They had tracked her, found her, found them. "What do we do?" she whispered, panic rising. Crow didn't hesitate. "Camp's too exposed here. Pack your mule. Quick, there's a place, higher up, harder to find." He began rapidly breaking camp, kicking dirt over the fire, gathering his own meager belongings with practiced speed. "Can the boy ride?" I think so," Abigail stammered, rushing to bundle the still weak Samuel onto their mule. "Good," Crow grunted. "Stay close behind me, and stay quiet." He swung onto his own horse, rifle held ready across his saddlebow, and led them away from the sheltered alcove, deeper into the labyrinthine canyons of the dragoons, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke and the lingering threat of discovery. The refuge had been temporary. The conflict was escalating, drawing the Dark Cowboy, Silas Crow, deeper into the trouble that had followed Abigail Hayes from Redemption Ridge. His solitude was broken, whether he liked it or not. The place Silas Crow led them to was almost invisible, a narrow fissure hidden behind a thick screen of ancient twisted junipers, opening into a small, sheltered box canyon with sheer rock walls, a tiny spring bubbling up in one corner, and a shallow cave offering protection from the elements. It was a natural fortress, accessible only by a single, easily defended trail. Even from above, it would be hard to spot. Clearly, Crow knew this country intimately, knew its secrets, its hiding places. He had likely used this refuge before. "We wait here," Crow said, dismounting and immediately scanning the surrounding ridges. "See if they follow. See what they do." He helped Abigail get Samuel settled in the cave, rebuilding a small, smokeless fire just inside the entrance. Samuel, exhausted from the ride, quickly fell into a feverish sleep. Abigail watched Crow as he moved around the small canyon, checking sight lines, positioning rocks for cover near the entrance trail. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator on its own territory. The initial fear she felt towards him was slowly being replaced by a grudging reliance, a sense of safety she hadn't felt since Daniel's death. Yet, the mystery remained. Who was he really? Why live like this, hidden away? What ghosts haunted his past? They spent 2 days in the hidden canyon. Crow scouted constantly, returning silently, offering brief reports. Saw him, down below, casting about. Haven't found the trail up here yet. Or, one rode back towards town. The other two are making camp near the canyon mouth. Setting in, Tim. Pembroke's men weren't giving up. They knew she was out here, knew she was alive. Their presence was a constant, low-grade threat, trapping Abigail, Samuel, and now Crow in this small, rocky sanctuary. Samuel's condition remained precarious. The lung fever clung stubbornly. He was weak, his small face flushed, his breathing often shallow and ragged. Abigail nursed him tirelessly, using the last of Crow's herbs, rationing their dwindling food supplies, praying for his recovery while fearing the men hunting them just beyond the canyon walls. Crow watched her, his usual reserve occasionally softening when he looked at the sick child. One afternoon, he returned from scouting with a brace of plump quail. He cooked them carefully over the fire, offering the most tender portions to Samuel, then sharing the rest with Abigail. It was a simple meal, eaten in silence, but it felt like a communion, a shared moment of humanity in their harsh predicament. "He needs real medicine," Abigail said quietly, looking at Samuel sleeping fitfully. "Poultices help, but the fever," Crow nodded grimly. "Town medicine," he murmured, almost to himself. "Sometimes helps, sometimes—" He trailed off, a shadow darkening his features. "You don't trust doctors?" Abigail asked, sensing another layer to his story. He shrugged, turning away to clean his rifle again, his standard method of deflection. Trust actions, not words, not badges, not fancy bags. The conversation died, but it left Abigail wondering. Had he been wronged by a doctor too? Or was his distrust deeper, part of a larger rejection of the civilized world and its authorities? On the third day, the situation escalated. Crow returned from scouting, his movements urgent, his eyes hard. They found the trail, both of them, coming up slow. Be here within the hour. He checked his rifle, then the heavy Colt Dragoon revolver tucked in his belt. Stay in the cave with the boy. Keep him quiet. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. Understand? His voice was low, intense, commanding. Abigail nodded, her heart pounding. She pulled the sleeping Samuel deeper into the cave, her hand straying to the small boot pistol Jed had given her. No, wait. Wrong story. That was Jed. Silas Crow hadn't given her a gun. She only had Daniel's skinning knife. She felt a surge of fear, of helplessness. Crow took up a position behind a cluster of boulders near the narrow entrance to their hidden canyon, his rifle resting steady, merging with the rock and shadow, becoming utterly still. Waiting. Abigail could only watch from the cave entrance, hidden in the shadows, her breath catching in her throat. She heard them before she saw them, the scrape of boots on rock, a muttered curse. Then two figures appeared, moving cautiously up the narrow trail. Hired guns, rough-looking men with rifles held ready, their eyes scanning the canyon ahead. They paused near the entrance, clearly wary, sensing the potential for ambush in the confined space. "See anything, Nate?" one called back softly. "Nothing," the other replied. "Quiet as a tomb up here. Maybe Crow ain't here. Maybe it was just the woman and kid's tracks. Pembroke wants 'em found. Said Crow might be helping her. Said Crow owes him." The first man stepped forward, peering into the canyon. "Let's check it out. Be quick." He took 2 more steps into the canyon entrance. That's when Crow fired. The heavy rifle report echoed deafeningly off the rock walls. The lead man cried out, spinning, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clattering down the rocks. He stumbled back, seeking cover. The second man reacted instantly, diving behind a boulder near the trail entrance, returning fire wildly towards Crow's position. Bullets whined off the rocks near Crow, sending chips flying. Crow didn't flinch, didn't fire back immediately. He waited, patient, letting the gunman reveal his exact location. The firefight settled into a tense stalemate. The wounded man moaned behind his cover. The second gunman fired sporadically, trying to pin Crow down, yelling threats and curses. Crow remained silent, motionless, waiting for his shot. Abigail watched, terrified, praying for Crow, praying for Samuel not to wake and cry out. The minutes stretched, thick with tension. Then, the second gunman made a mistake. Growing impatient, or perhaps thinking Crow was hit, he risked exposing himself slightly, leaning out from behind his boulder to get a better angle. Crow's rifle spoke again. A single, deliberate shot. The gunman jerked, then slumped sideways, still. Silence fell, profound and sudden, broken only by the wounded man's whimpering and the echo of the shot fading down the canyon. Crow waited a long moment, scanning the entrance, ensuring there were no other threats. Then he rose slowly, rifle still ready, and walked cautiously towards the canyon mouth. The wounded man watched him approach, his face pale with fear. "Don't kill me," the man pleaded, holding up his good hand. "Pembroke paid us. Just wanted the woman. Didn't know about you being here." Crow looked down at him, his face hard, unreadable. He nudged the man's dropped rifle further away with his boot. "Who are you?" Crow asked, his voice flat. Name's Cully. T'other one's Nate. Why does Pembroke want the woman? Said she knew something about her husband's claim. Something dangerous to him. Sent us to scare her off permanent." Cully winced in pain. Didn't say nothing about running into Silas Crow. So, Pembroke knew Crow and feared him, or at least knew his reputation. Crow's silence deepened the mystery surrounding him. Crow considered the wounded man, Cully. He could have finished him easily, left him for the buzzards. It might have been the safer option. But instead, he motioned with his rifle. "Get up, if you can walk." Cully struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Crow retrieved Nate's rifle and Cully's, emptying them before tossing them aside. He then retrieved their horses, which had been tethered further down the trail. "Take your friend's horse," Crow ordered Cully. "Ride back to Redemption Ridge. Tell Pembroke. Tell him Abigail Hayes and her son are under my protection now. Tell him to leave them be, or he'll answer to me. Directly." Cully stared, astonished by the unexpected mercy, then nodded quickly, scrambling onto the horse. He didn't need telling twice. He rode away as fast as the treacherous trail would allow, leaving his dead partner behind. Crow watched him go, then turned back towards the cave, his face grim. He had deliberately spared Cully, deliberately sent a message to Pembroke. It was a declaration of war. He had drawn a line in the sand, shielding Abigail and Samuel, placing himself squarely between them and Pembroke's ruthless ambition. His isolation was truly over. He had chosen a side, and in doing so, he had likely sealed his own fate, inviting the full force of Pembroke's wrath down upon their hidden sanctuary. The conflict had escalated from a pursuit into an open confrontation, with Silas Crow, the Dark Cowboy, stepping out of the shadows to become an unlikely protector. Life in the hidden canyon took on a new, sharper edge. The immediate threat from Pembroke's men was gone, but the message Crow had sent hung heavy in the air. Retaliation was inevitable. Pembroke wasn't a man to be defied, especially not by someone like Silas Crow, a figure clearly tied to some past conflict the judge preferred buried. The sanctuary felt less like a refuge and more like a temporary stronghold waiting for the next siege. During the tense days that followed, the dynamic between Abigail and Crow continued its slow, complex evolution. With the immediate danger slightly lessened, and perhaps prompted by Crow's decisive action, Abigail found the courage to ask the questions that burned within her. "Cully mentioned Pembroke knew you," she said one evening, as they sat by the small fire after Samuel had fallen asleep. "He said you owed Pembroke. What did he mean? Why are you living out here, alone?" Crow was silent for a long time, staring into the flames, the firelight casting stark shadows across his scarred face. Abigail thought he wouldn't answer, that he would retreat back into his customary silence. But then he spoke, his voice low and gravelly, dredging up memories long buried. "Pembroke and me," he began, his gaze distant. "We go way back, too far back." He told her a story remarkably similar to the one Jed Stone had told Eleanor Vance in another tale, yet unique in its painful details. How he and Pembroke had been young partners, prospecting together years ago in California during the first gold rush fever. How they'd struck a rich vein after months of hardship. How Pembroke, consumed by greed, had ambushed him near their claim, shot him, taken the gold, registered the claim solely in his own name, and left Crow for dead in a remote canyon. "Thought he finished me," Crow murmured, a muscle working in his jaw. "But I crawled out. Took me months to heal. By the time I could travel, Pembroke was long gone. Used my gold, our gold, to set himself up, build his respectable life, first elsewhere, then here in Redemption Ridge." "You came here looking for him?" Abigail asked softly, understanding the deep bitterness, the quest for justice or vengeance that must have driven him. Crow shook his head slowly. "No. Didn't know he was here till I drifted through a year or so back. Recognized him instantly. He recognized me too." A humorless smile touched Crow's lips. Saw the look in his eyes. Fear. Knew I was a ghost come back to haunt him. Didn't confront him then. Wasn't worth the trouble. Figured living out here alone was better than stirring up that hornet's nest. Let the past stay buried. "Until now," Abigail whispered. "Until now," Crow confirmed, his gaze meeting hers, intense and serious. "He forced my hand, coming after you, and maybe," he hesitated, "maybe Daniel, your husband, forced it too." Daniel? Abigail leaned forward. Did you know him? Met him a few times, Crow admitted. Up in the hills. Seemed like a decent man. Asked questions about the land, about old claims, about Pembroke's dealings. Crow's eyes hardened. He was getting close, I reckon. Too close. Pembroke couldn't afford to have his past dug up. Couldn't afford his shaky foundations exposed. Daniel's accident. It weren't no accident, Abigail. Pembroke arranged it. Same way he tried to arrange yours. The confirmation of her deepest fears, spoken aloud by this man who understood Pembroke's darkness firsthand, hit Abigail with the force of a physical blow. Tears welled, not just of grief for Daniel, but of rage at Pembroke's calculated evil. Crow watched her, his usual impassivity softening into something akin to shared understanding, shared loss. So, you protected me, Abigail realized, not just out of pity, but because you knew. You suspected Pembroke killed Daniel. Suspected, Crow corrected. Didn't have proof. Still don't. Just a feeling. And a knowledge of the man. He looked towards the sleeping Samuel. And maybe seeing you two out there, alone, running from him, it stirred something. Something I thought long dead. He fell silent again, the confession leaving a raw vulnerability hanging in the air between them. This revelation, this shared history of being wronged by the same man, forged a powerful, unspoken bond between the widow and the Dark Cowboy. They were no longer just a woman, seeking refuge, and a man offering grudging shelter. They were allies, bound by a common enemy, a shared need for justice, and perhaps a nascent, fragile trust built in the crucible of shared danger. Abigail saw past Crow's rough exterior, his deliberate isolation, to the wounded man beneath, the man capable of unexpected loyalty and fierce protection. Crow, in turn, seemed to see beyond Abigail's vulnerability, recognizing the core of steel, the quiet determination that had kept her going, the fierce maternal love that mirrored losses he likely kept locked deep inside. Their shared life in the canyon settled into a new rhythm, one underscored by constant vigilance, but also by a growing partnership. Crow taught Abigail more survival skills, how to read tracks, how to find water, how to move silently through the brush. He even began teaching her, patiently, how to handle the heavy Colt Dragoon, recognizing her need for self-defense beyond the inadequate skinning knife. Her progress was slow, hampered by her unfamiliarity with firearms, but her determination impressed him. Samuel, meanwhile, slowly recovering under Abigail's care, began to lose his fear of the quiet, watchful man. He'd follow Crow around the small canyon, asking questions only a child could ask, seemingly oblivious to the darkness surrounding the man. Crow, surprisingly, treated the boy with gruff gentleness, occasionally answering his questions, even showing him how to identify bird calls or whittle a piece of wood. These small moments chipped away further at Crow's defenses, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been before Pembroke's betrayal. But the peace was fragile, the threat constant. They knew Pembroke wouldn't simply give up. He couldn't afford to. Crow's message, delivered by the wounded Cully, was a direct challenge Pembroke would have to answer, ruthlessly and decisively. They scanned the ridges constantly, listened for any unnatural sound, slept lightly, weapons always within reach. The waiting game ended one clear, cold morning. Crow, returning from a high vantage point where he kept watch, carried grim news. Posse, he stated flatly, his voice tight. Maybe 10, 12 riders. Coming up the main canyon slow, led by Pembroke himself and Sheriff Clayton. Abigail's heart sank. Pembroke hadn't just sent hired guns this time. He'd manipulated the town, used his authority, likely painting Crow as a dangerous outlaw who had abducted a helpless widow and child, turning the community against them, bringing the semblance of law down on their heads. Even Sheriff Clayton, however reluctant, was riding with them. "They know the way?" Abigail asked, fear coiling in her stomach. "Not yet," Crow said. "But Pembroke's got trackers this time. Good ones. They'll find the trail eventually. We don't have much time." He looked around the small canyon, their sanctuary now feeling like a trap. "Can't stay here. Can't outrun 'em with the boy." "Then what do we do?" Abigail whispered. Crow looked at her, his pale eyes holding a new, dangerous light. "We stop running. We make our stand. But not here." He pointed towards a complex network of narrow, intersecting canyons higher up the mountain, a place of tumbled rock, sheer cliffs, and confusing passages he had scouted previously. "The labyrinth," he murmured. "Easy to get lost in there if you don't know the way. Hard to fight in. Good place for an ambush, or a last stand." He met Abigail's gaze. "It's dangerous, but it's our only chance. Can you make the climb? With Samuel?" Abigail looked at her son, now awake, watching them with worried eyes, but no longer acutely ill. She looked at Crow, at the grim resolve on his face. She thought of Daniel, of Pembroke's treachery, of the life stolen from her. Running was no longer an option. "Yes," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "We can make it." Crow nodded once, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "All right then. Gather what you can carry. Travel light. We move now, before they cut us off." They abandoned the hidden canyon, leaving behind the ashes of their small fire, climbing quickly, desperately, towards the higher, more rugged terrain Crow called the labyrinth. Samuel rode the mule. Abigail walked beside him, using the sturdy stick Crow had made her, pushing herself harder than she ever thought possible. Crow led the way, moving swiftly but cautiously, erasing their tracks where he could, choosing paths over bare rock, through thick brush, making their passage as difficult to follow as possible. Behind them, unseen but felt, the posse organized by Judge Pembroke, driven by greed and lies, steadily closed the distance. The final confrontation was approaching, set not in the dusty streets of Redemption Ridge, but high in the unforgiving, rocky heart of the Dragoon Mountains. Abigail, the banished widow, and Silas Crow, the dark cowboy seeking his own redemption, prepared to make their stand together. The labyrinth lived up to its name. A confusing maze of narrow, twisting canyons, steep-sided arroyos, and towering rock formations sculpted by wind and time. The ground was treacherous, littered with loose shale and hidden crevices. Shadows lay deep even at midday, playing tricks on the eyes. Sound echoed strangely, making it impossible to pinpoint direction. It was a disorienting, dangerous place, easy to enter, potentially impossible to leave if you didn't know its secrets. But Silas Crow moved through it with the confidence of a man traversing his own backyard. He led Abigail and Samuel along hidden ledges, through narrow passages screened by brush, doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail, always climbing higher, seeking the strategic ground he clearly had in mind. Abigail struggled to keep up, her breath rasping in the thin mountain air, her muscles screaming in protest, her limp a constant, agonizing reminder of her body's limitations. But the sight of Samuel, pale but resolute, clinging tightly to the mule's saddle horn, and the grim determination radiating from Crow ahead of her, fueled her resolve. She wouldn't falter. She wouldn't fail her son. She wouldn't let Pembroke win. Finally, after hours of grueling climbing, Crow stopped. They had reached a high, narrow plateau, almost a shelf, protected on three sides by sheer rock walls. The only approach was via a steep, narrow defile choked with boulders, a natural bottleneck, easily defended. From this vantage point, they could see sections of the canyons below, including the main approach route the posse would likely take. "Here," Crow said, his voice tight with exertion but steady. "We make our stand here." He helped Abigail get Samuel settled in a shallow cave near the back of the plateau, offering some protection. "Stay here with the boy. Keep him down. I'll watch the approach." He positioned himself behind a cluster of large boulders overlooking the narrow defile, rifle ready, becoming one with the rock and shadow again. The wait began. The silence of the high mountains pressed in, amplifying the thudding of Abigail's heart. She held Samuel close, whispering reassurances she didn't feel, straining her ears for any sound from below. Hours passed. The sun beat down, reflecting harshly off the pale rock. Thirst became a torment. Their canteens were nearly empty again. Then they heard it. The distant clatter of horseshoes on rock, muffled voices echoing up from the canyons below. The posse. They were getting closer. Abigail's grip tightened on Samuel. She glanced towards Crow's position. He was utterly motionless, a study in deadly patience. More time crawled by. The sounds grew louder, closer. Abigail could hear Pembroke's authoritative voice giving orders, the frustrated shouts of men struggling with the difficult terrain, the nervous whinny of a horse. They were entering the labyrinth, searching, casting about for the trail Crow had deliberately obscured. Suddenly, a single rifle shot cracked the silence from below, followed by an angry shout. Had Crow been spotted? Abigail's heart leaped into her throat, but Crow remained motionless. A few moments later, another shout, further away this time. "Lost the trail again, Judge. This place is a devil's maze." Pembroke's furious reply echoed faintly. "Spread out. Find them. They can't have gone far. $10 gold for the man who spots the crow." The posse was dispersing, searching the branching canyons below. This was both good and bad. It made them harder to track as a group, but increased the chance of a smaller party stumbling upon the hidden trail leading up to the plateau. Crow remained vigilant, his gaze sweeping the approaches. Abigail stayed hidden, with Samuel praying. The tension was almost unbearable. Then, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Samuel, weakened by his illness and the ordeal, began to cough. A dry, hacking sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Abigail tried to muffle it, pressing his face against her shoulder, but another cough escaped, echoing slightly off the rock walls. Below, a sharp voice barked, "Hear that? Up there! Sounds like a kid." Abigail froze, terror gripping her. They'd been given away. She saw Crow tense, slowly shifting his rifle. Footsteps scrambled on the rocks below, moving towards the base of the narrow defile, leading up to their plateau. "Found 'em, Judge!" the voice yelled triumphantly. "They're trapped up on the shelf." More men converged below. Abigail could hear Pembroke shouting orders. "Surround the base. Nobody gets down. Clayton, take half the men. See if there's another way up around the back. The rest of you, start climbing. Flush 'em out." Sheriff Clayton's reluctant voice protested. "Judge, it's a bottleneck. Suicide to go up there if Crow's waiting." "Are you questioning my orders, Sheriff?" Pembroke's voice was glacial. "Or are you siding with the outlaw? Move!" Reluctantly, the men below began their assault. 3 or 4 started scrambling up the narrow, boulder-choked defile, firing blindly towards the top, using the rocks for cover. Others spread out, searching for alternative routes, while Pembroke and a few others remained at the base, directing the attack. Crow waited until the first climbers were halfway up, exposed amongst the boulders. Then his rifle began to speak, not rapidly, but with deadly, deliberate precision. Each shot echoed, followed by a cry of pain or the clatter of a falling rifle. He wasn't necessarily killing them, Abigail realized, but disabling them, targeting arms, legs, creating chaos and fear, making the narrow passage impassable for those behind. His one-eyed aim was devastatingly effective in the confined space. The climbers faltered, pinned down, unwilling to advance into the deadly, accurate fire from above. They yelled curses at Crow, firing sporadically, wasting ammunition against the solid rock protecting him. But the threat from the other direction remained. Sheriff Clayton and his men were searching for another way up. Abigail knew she couldn't just hide. Crow couldn't watch both directions at once. She had to help. "Stay here, Samuel," she whispered fiercely, settling the frightened boy deeper into the cave. "Don't make a sound." She picked up Daniel's skinning knife, her only weapon, took a deep breath, and crawled cautiously towards the back edge of the plateau, peering over just enough to scan the sheer rock walls that formed their rear defense. For a long time, she saw nothing but rock and sky. Then, a flicker of movement far below to the side, Sheriff Clayton and 3 men. They had found a narrow ledge, barely a foothold, winding its way up the cliff face towards the plateau, hidden from Crow's position. They were climbing slowly, carefully, hoping to achieve surprise from the rear. Abigail's mind raced. She couldn't fight them, not with a knife. But maybe she could stop them. Above the ledge, they were climbing. The edge of the plateau was littered with loose rock and scree, weathered and unstable. If she could dislodge enough of it. Working frantically but quietly, she began pushing, prying, rolling the largest loose rock she could manage towards the cliff edge directly above the climber's path. It was heavy, desperate work, her hands quickly becoming raw. Below, Clayton and his men continued their ascent, unaware. They were halfway up, exposed on the narrow ledge. Abigail gathered her strength, put her shoulder against a particularly large, precariously balanced boulder, and heaved. It teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then crashed downwards, dislodging a cascade of smaller rocks and scree with it. The avalanche of stone rained down onto the ledge below. Shouts of alarm and pain echoed up. Abigail didn't see exactly what happened, didn't dare look too closely, but the climbing stopped abruptly. She heard Clayton yelling orders to retreat, the sounds of men scrambling back down the way they came, abandoning the flanking maneuver. She had stopped them, bought Crow precious time, defended their sanctuary with the only weapon she had, ingenuity and desperation. She scrambled back towards the cave, her heart pounding, just as the firing from the front defile intensified again. Pembroke, furious at the failed flanking attempt, was pushing his remaining men harder, urging them up the slope. Crow's rifle answered, methodical, deadly. The battle raged, echoing through the labyrinth, a desperate defense against overwhelming odds. How long could they hold out? Crow had limited ammunition. Their water was gone. Samuel was terrified. Pembroke was relentless. Abigail huddled with her son, praying, listening to the terrifying symphony of the gunfight, feeling utterly helpless, yet strangely resolute. She had done her part. Now it depended on Silas Crow, the Dark Cowboy, and the deadly accuracy of his one good eye. The siege of the plateau was the crucible, testing not just their aim and endurance, but the strength of their unlikely alliance, their will to survive against the man who represented the darkness they had both fled. The stalemate held for what felt like an eternity, the sun beating down, the echoes of gunfire ricocheting through the canyons. Crow's deliberate shots kept the attackers pinned down in the defile, but Abigail knew his ammunition couldn't last forever. Pembroke, furious and impatient, could be heard yelling threats and promises of reward from below, trying to urge his reluctant men forward. Sheriff Clayton and the flanking party had apparently retreated completely after the rock slide. Then, the firing from below slackened. A tense silence fell, broken only by the wind whistling over the plateau rim and the distant moans of the wounded men trapped in the defile. "Crow!" Pembroke's voice boomed up, trying a different tactic. "Silas, Crow, it doesn't have to end this way. Send the woman and child down, unharmed. I swear it on my name. You can walk away, disappear back into the mountains. Nobody needs to know you were here." Crow didn't answer immediately. Abigail held her breath. Would he take the offer? Sacrifice them for his own freedom? His past was filled with reasons to distrust promises, especially Pembroke's. "Your name ain't worth spit, Pembroke." Crow's voice finally rasped down, cold and contemptuous. "And the woman and child stay with me." Pembroke roared in frustration. "Then you'll die up there, all of you, when I get my hands on you, Crow." The threat dissolved into incoherent rage. More sporadic shots were fired upwards, but the assault had lost its momentum. Pembroke's men were clearly unwilling to charge directly into Crow's deadly aim again. But they weren't retreating either. They were settling in for a siege, planning to starve them out, wait for thirst and desperation to do their work. As the afternoon wore on, the situation grew dire. Their last drops of water were gone. Samuel was weakening again, his lips cracked. Crow's ammunition was visibly low. Hope seemed to be draining away with the fading sunlight. Suddenly, a new sound reached them. Not gunfire, but horses approaching from the main canyon below, moving at a steady trot. Too many horses for Pembroke's remaining posse. Abigail and Crow exchanged wary glances. Who could it be? Reinforcements for Pembroke or something else? A voice hailed from below, clear and authoritative, different from Pembroke's. Judge Pembroke! Sheriff Clayton! Hold your fire! This is Marshal Evans, United States Marshal's office. Abigail gasped. The law? Real law? How? Crow peered cautiously over the rim. Below, a group of perhaps 6 riders, dusty but looking official, led by a stern-faced man with a federal marshal's star glinting on his vest, had arrived at the base of the defile, confronting a clearly surprised and displeased Judge Pembroke. Sheriff Clayton emerged from cover, looking immensely relieved. Marshal Evans! Pembroke blustered, trying to regain control. What is the meaning of this? We have dangerous outlaws cornered up there. Silas Crow, a known fugitive and an accomplice. That's not the report I received, Judge, Marshal Evans replied coolly, his eyes scanning the scene. The wounded men, the dead gunman, the evidence of a fierce firefight. I received an urgent telegraph from Sheriff Clayton here. He nodded towards the local sheriff. Relayed via Helena, detailing suspected murder, conspiracy, and illegal banishment orchestrated by you. Allegations supported by testimony gathered by Dr. Evans, back in Redemption Creek, regarding your suspicious acquisition of the Hayes property and Daniel Hayes's death. Abigail realized with a start. Doc Evans, the kindly town doctor from a previous tale. No, that must be a different Dr. Evans, or perhaps the narrator reused the name. Let's assume this is a different Doc Evans, perhaps the one who treated Samuel briefly or knew Daniel. Or maybe Sheriff Clayton, finding his conscience or fearing Pembroke's reckless escalation, had managed to get a message out, using the doctor as a trusted intermediary. That felt right. Sheriff Clayton, pushed too far, had acted. Pembroke's face turned ashen. Lies. Clayton is incompetent, influenced by this woman. He pointed wildly up towards the plateau. We'll sort out the truth, Judge, Marshal Evans said grimly. But right now, you and your men are laying down your arms. You're all coming back to Redemption Ridge with me. Under arrest. He gestured to his deputies, who moved forward purposefully. Pembroke's men, seeing federal marshals, offered no resistance, dropping their weapons quickly. Pembroke himself seemed to deflate, his power evaporating under the weight of federal authority. He stared up towards the plateau where Crow and Abigail watched, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred, before being disarmed and placed under guard. Marshal Evans looked up towards the rim. Silas Crow, Abigail Hayes, it's safe now. You can come down. Crow remained wary, rifle still ready. He looked at Abigail, then down at the scene below. Finally, slowly, he lowered his rifle. He helped Abigail bring Samuel out of the cave. The boy, though weak, managed a small, relieved smile, seeing the men below weren't shooting anymore. The descent was slow, arduous. Crow helped Abigail and Samuel navigate the treacherous defile, stepping carefully past the wounded and the dead gunman. When they reached the bottom, Marshal Evans approached them, his expression stern but not unkind. Silas Crow, the marshal said, there's an old warrant for you out of California. Manslaughter, connected to a disputed claim. Pembroke filed it years ago. Crow met his gaze steadily. Self-defense, Marshal. Pembroke tried to kill me first. Took witnesses dying to prove it back then. The Marshal studied him for a long moment. Perhaps. Sheriff Clayton's message mentioned your complicated history with the judge. And Mrs. Hayes here, he nodded towards Abigail, owes you her life and her son's. That counts for something. He paused. The California warrant is old. Witnesses are likely scattered or dead. And Judge Pembroke, he glanced towards the captive judge with contempt, is hardly a credible complainant anymore. I reckon we can consider that old matter closed, unless new evidence surfaces. It was a grudging pardon, an acknowledgment of the rough justice of the frontier. Abigail felt a wave of relief wash over her. Crow was free. They were all safe. Pembroke was finished. Marshal Evans turned to Abigail. Mrs. Hayes, your property, the Bar H, will be returned to you. Judge Pembroke's illegal actions are null and void. Redemption Ridge owes you an apology and justice. Abigail looked back towards the distant valley where her home lay, then at Samuel leaning weakly against her, then at Silas Crow standing silently nearby, his face unreadable as always, but the tension gone from his shoulders. What now? Could she go back? Could she face the town, rebuild her life on the ashes of betrayal? Or did her future lie elsewhere, perhaps connected to the enigmatic man who had become her unlikely protector? The immediate aftermath saw Marshal Evans restoring order with quiet efficiency. Pembroke and his remaining gunmen, including the wounded Cully, were taken back to Redemption Ridge under heavy guard to await trial by a federal court, their power broken, their conspiracy exposed. Sheriff Clayton, having found his courage at a critical moment, was commended by the marshal and began the difficult task of rebuilding trust in local law enforcement. Abigail and Samuel returned to Redemption Ridge, not as outcasts, but as survivors, symbols of Pembroke's treachery and the resilience required to overcome it. The townsfolk, deeply ashamed of their complicity and eagerness to believe Pembroke's lies, welcomed her back with awkward apologies and offers of help. The Bar H Ranch was hers again. The cloud over Daniel's name cleared. With help from neighbors eager to make amends, she began the slow process of reclaiming her home, repairing the neglect, chasing away the ghosts of the past weeks. Samuel, receiving proper care now, slowly regained his strength, the shadow of his ordeal gradually fading from his young eyes. Silas Crow did not return to Redemption Ridge. After ensuring Abigail and Samuel were safely escorted back by the marshal, he disappeared back into the Dragoon Mountains as silently as he had emerged. He sought no thanks, no reward, no place in the community he had inadvertently helped save. His path remained solitary, his past wounds perhaps too deep to allow him to fully rejoin the world he had turned his back on years ago. Abigail often found herself looking towards the rugged peaks, wondering about him. Gratitude warred with a strange sense of loss, an unfinished connection. He had been her protector, her ally, a man who understood darkness but had chosen to act with honor, however gruffly. She owed him more than she could ever repay. Did they ever meet again? The story doesn't say for certain. Some whispers claimed a lone rider, matching Crow's description, was occasionally seen leaving supplies near the Bar H boundary fence during hard winters or dry spells, disappearing before he could be thanked. Others said Abigail, once her ranch was thriving and Samuel was older, sometimes rode out towards the dragoons herself, leaving bundles of supplies or tools near the entrance to the labyrinth, gestures of gratitude left unanswered, but perhaps silently received. Their story became a legend in Redemption Ridge, a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and greed, but also a powerful reminder of resilience, unexpected alliances, and the profound truth that appearances, whether of a respectable judge or a dark, solitary cowboy, can be dangerously deceptive. It taught the town, and perhaps teaches us, that true character is revealed in times of crisis, that strength can be found in vulnerability, and that refuge and redemption can appear in the most unlikely forms, sometimes emerging from the very shadows we fear. And so, the dust settles over Redemption Ridge, leaving behind the wreckage of ambition and the quiet strength of survival. Abigail Hayes, the banished widow, found not just refuge, but her own resilience, her own voice, in the face of terrible injustice. Silas Crow, the dark cowboy haunted by betrayal, stepped out of his self-imposed exile to defend the innocent, finding perhaps a measure of his own redemption in the act, even if he couldn't fully embrace the world again. Theirs is a story that cuts to the heart of the Western experience, the harshness, the beauty, the constant struggle between darkness and light, both in the landscape and within the human soul. It teaches us, doesn't it, about the danger of judging too quickly, of letting fear or prejudice blind us to the truth of a person's character. Abigail was dismissed for her grief and independence. Crow was feared for his solitary nature and rumored past. Yet, it was the outwardly respectable Judge Pembroke who proved the true monster. It's a timeless lesson. Look beyond the surface. Look at actions. Look at courage. Look at compassion, however rough its form. Their unlikely alliance reminds us that connection can be forged in the most difficult circumstances, that shared vulnerability can build bridges stronger than stone. They were two outcasts, pushed to the fringes by cruelty and injustice, who found strength not in spite of their wounds, but perhaps because of them. They understood survival. They understood the cost of betrayal. And in that shared understanding, they found the courage to stand together. It's a story about finding refuge, not just in a hidden canyon, but within oneself and within the unexpected kindness of another. It's about the possibility of finding light even in the darkest corners, and the enduring power of the human spirit to fight for what's right, even when all seems lost. Out here, in the quiet corners of history, courage often wears a simple face, and strength is revealed in unexpected ways. If this story of Abigail and Silas, of their struggle against injustice, and their discovery of resilience spoke to you, I hope you'll carry it with you. Share it if you feel so led, and let us know your thoughts below. What does refuge mean to you? Where have you found unexpected strength? And please, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that need to be told, more voices of justice from the heart of the American West. Until next time, friends, may you look beyond the surface. May you find courage in unlikely places, and may you always offer refuge in whatever form you can to those battling the storms. This is your narrator, wishing you safe trails and clear sight. Good night.